I never thought the hands I once held as a child would one day strike me across the face. My daughter-in-law stood there, trembling with anger, her palms still raised, demanding that I hand over the keys to the very house my late husband and I built together. In that moment, time stood still. The walls that had echoed with laughter for decades now felt like strangers watching me fall apart. I did not recognize my son's voice as he sided with her. It was as if the two people I loved most had turned into strangers before my eyes. Before I continue, please take a moment to subscribe to Grandma Fables and stay with me until the end. This story changed my life forever. And perhaps it will change the way you see love, family, and forgiveness too. My name is Evelyn Hartwell, and I am 69 years old. I live in a quiet little town called Willow Creek, a place where time seems to move a little slower, and every sunrise feels like a gentle reminder that life still goes on. The streets are lined with old maple trees that turn golden in the fall, and in the evenings the air smells faintly of wood smoke and apple pie from the bakery on Main Street. It is peaceful here, or at least it used to be. I have lived in the same house for more than 40 years. It is a modest, two-story home, painted pale blue, with a porch swing that creaks when the wind blows just right. My late husband Thomas built most of it himself. He was a carpenter by trade, but more than that, he was a man of patience and quiet strength. He used to say, "Wood has a soul, Evie. If you listen long enough, it tells you how it wants to be shaped." I used to laugh at that, but now, every time I run my hand along the banister he carved, I swear I can almost hear him. Thomas and I met when I was just 21, at a church picnic by the river. He was steady and kind, with calloused hands and eyes that always looked like they were smiling, even when his mouth was not. We married the following spring, and our life together was simple but full. He opened a small carpentry shop in town, and I handled the books and the clients while raising our only son, Michael. When I think back on those years, I remember laughter, a home full of warmth, the scent of sawdust and cinnamon, and the sound of my husband humming while he worked. We did not have much, but we had love, and that made everything enough. Then, 10 years ago, Thomas passed away. A heart attack, sudden and cruel. One minute he was telling me about a new project he wanted to start, and the next, he was gone. The silence that followed was unbearable. It was not just the absence of his voice, but the absence of everything he was. The steady presence, the comfort, the strength. The house that once felt alive suddenly felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. For weeks, I could not even sit in his chair without breaking down. I would find myself talking to him as if he were still there. "Tom, what do I do about the bills?" "Tom, how do I fix the leaky faucet?" The only answer was the ticking of the clock and the hum of the refrigerator. But I had to keep going, not for myself, but for Michael. He was my pride and joy, a bright, curious boy with his father's calm eyes and my stubborn streak. From the time he was little, he was always asking questions, always trying to understand how things worked. He loved helping his father in the workshop, holding nails and handing over tools like a miniature apprentice. When Thomas passed away, Michael was 27, already working as an engineer in the city. He came home for the funeral and stayed for a while, helping me through the hardest days. He was so gentle, so protective. He would make me tea in the evenings and sit quietly beside me, talking about his father's old projects, promising that he would look after me now. I believed him. I wanted to believe that no matter what happened, I would never be alone. After Thomas's passing, I tried to keep the carpentry shop running. I was never as skilled as he was, but I hired 2 of his old workers and managed the books. Slowly, business picked up again, not because I was any good at it, but because the town respected Thomas and they wanted to help his legacy live on. People would come in and tell me stories about how he built their porch or fixed their barn or crafted a cradle for their first child. Each story was like a little light in the darkness. Life settled into a quiet rhythm. I would wake early, open the shop, handle the paperwork, and come home to an empty but peaceful house. Some evenings, I would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the fireflies, telling myself that I had done my best, as a wife and as a mother. Then one spring afternoon, everything began to change. Michael came home for dinner, and he was not alone. He brought with him a young woman named Clara Benson. She was lovely, the kind of woman who seemed to bring brightness into a room without even trying. She had chestnut brown hair that fell loosely around her shoulders and a way of speaking that was confident but soft. She told me she worked as a marketing consultant for a design firm in the city. I remember thinking how perfectly she and Michael seemed to fit together, his calm steadiness balanced by her lively spirit. We sat around the table that night, eating roast chicken and mashed potatoes, and I could not stop smiling. Clara complimented my cooking, laughed at Michael's corny jokes, and even helped me clear the dishes afterward. When she turned to me and said, "You raised a wonderful man, Mrs. Hartwell," my heart warmed. I thought to myself, finally, someone who truly sees him. Over the next few months, Clara became part of our family. She would visit often, sometimes bringing little gifts, a bouquet of wildflowers, a jar of homemade jam, or a new book she thought I would like. We would sit together in the garden, chatting about everything and nothing, sipping tea as the sunlight faded. I started to think of her as the daughter I never had. When Michael told me he was going to propose, I cried. Not out of sadness, but out of joy. I felt like life was giving me another chance, another reason to hope. I offered to help with the wedding costs, to contribute toward their new apartment, even to pass down the old Hartwell family silver that had belonged to my grandmother. For a while, everything seemed perfect. But slowly, little things began to change. So small at first that I almost ignored them. Clara became distant. Her tone grew sharper, her eyes colder. She stopped visiting as often. When I called, she rarely answered, and when she did, her replies were polite but clipped. I told myself she was busy, that all young women adjusting to marriage go through stressful periods. I did not want to think ill of her. Then Michael began to change too. He stopped calling me every week like he used to. When he did come by, he seemed distracted, restless, always checking his phone, always in a hurry. Once I asked if everything was all right. He smiled and said, "Of course, Mom. We are just busy." But his voice lacked warmth. The day that truly broke something inside me was a sunny afternoon in June. I invited them over for lunch, just something simple, sandwiches and lemonade in the garden. Clara arrived looking beautiful as always, though she barely looked at me. I tried to make conversation, to ask about her work, her family, her plans. She gave short answers, eyes fixed on her phone. At one point, I turned to her and asked with a smile, "So, when is the wedding? I know Michael has been planning something special." She looked up from her phone, paused for a moment, then said calmly, "Oh, we got married last weekend." My heart stopped. You got married?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, took a sip of her drink, and added, "Yes, it was a small ceremony. We only invited close friends." I remember the sound of the wind moving through the trees, the faint hum of the bees in the garden, and the sharp, hollow ache in my chest. I smiled because I did not know what else to do. "I see," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, congratulations." That night, after they left, I sat alone on the porch until the sky turned black. I stared at the stars and felt an emptiness I had not known since the day Thomas died. I kept hearing her words. We only invited close friends. I had spent my life giving everything I had to my family. I had loved Michael with every ounce of my being, built his future, stood by him, believed in him. And now I was no longer even considered family. Something deep inside me shifted that night, a quiet grief that settled into my bones, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy. I told myself that maybe they just wanted privacy, that it was their decision. But in truth, I knew something had changed forever. And yet, even then, I did not let go. Because a mother never truly does. I still called him, still sent birthday gifts, still asked how they were doing. And every time I did, I felt that invisible wall between us grow taller, colder, stronger. I would stand by the window, watching the lights of the town twinkle in the distance, wondering how love, something once so pure, could become so painful. But I could not have known that the worst was yet to come. For soon, the love I had fought to protect would be turned against me in ways I never imagined. And the people I cherished most would become the ones who would break me. After that afternoon when Clara told me they had married without me, I found myself wandering the house in silence. Every corner felt heavier somehow. The laughter that once filled these rooms seemed like a distant echo that belonged to another lifetime. I kept telling myself that they were young, that perhaps they wanted something simple, something private. But deep inside, I knew there was more to it. A mother knows. The following weeks were strange. Michael stopped calling almost entirely. When I phoned him, his responses were short. There was always something. Meetings, deadlines. Clara is tired tonight, or we will visit soon. But soon never came. I began to worry. Not for myself, but for him. He sounded different, uncertain, as though he were speaking carefully, measuring every word. There was no laughter, no warmth. Sometimes when I heard Clara's voice faintly in the background, she seemed irritated, as if my call were an inconvenience. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself I was imagining things, but that small ache in my heart only grew stronger. One Sunday morning, I decided to surprise them. I baked a loaf of banana bread, Michael's favorite, wrapped it neatly, and drove into the city to their apartment. It was a small, modern place tucked behind a row of shops. I knocked on the door and waited, the bread still warm in my hands. When the door finally opened, it was Clara who answered. She looked startled. Her expression flickered between surprise and discomfort. "Oh, Mrs. Hartwell," she said, forcing a smile. "We were not expecting you." "I know," I said gently. "I just wanted to bring something for you both. Is Michael home?" Her gaze shifted. "He is resting. He has had a long week. Perhaps next time you could call first." Her tone was polite, but cold, like a door closing softly in your face. I nodded, feeling small, foolish. "Of course," I said quietly. I did not mean to intrude. She took the bread from my hands without meeting my eyes. "Thank you," she murmured. "We appreciate it." And just like that, the door closed. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood grain of that door, listening to the muffled city noise behind me. The banana bread had still been warm. I had imagined us sharing it with coffee, laughing the way families do. But instead, I turned and walked back to my car, holding on to the rail as if the ground beneath me had shifted. From that day on, I stopped trying so hard. I told myself that if they wanted space, I would give it. I would not call. I would not visit. I would simply wait for them to come when they were ready. Weeks passed, then months. The phone stayed silent. I poured myself into work again, managing the carpentry shop, paying bills, keeping things running. But even that began to change. One afternoon, while I was reviewing the monthly accounts, I noticed a large sum missing from the business account. I checked the records again, thinking I must have made a mistake. But the withdrawal had been approved, signed digitally under Michael's name. My heart began to race. I tried calling him that evening. No answer. I left a message asking him to call me back. 2 days later, he finally did. "Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I saw a withdrawal from the company account, a very large one. Do you know what that is about?" He hesitated before replying. "Yes, Mom. It was for some investments. Clara and I are helping to modernize the business. We are just moving some things around for now." "Without telling me?" I asked softly. He sighed. "Mom, you have done enough. You should not have to worry about these things anymore. I am handling it." Something in his tone chilled me. It was not cruel, but distant, like a man talking to a stranger, not his mother. "I appreciate your help," I said quietly. "But I am still responsible for this company. It was your father's life's work. I would like to understand what is being done." He paused again, then said, "You need to trust me, Mom. Clara and I know what we are doing. You do not have to be involved in everything." And before I could respond, he ended the call. That night, I could not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the old ledger open in front of me, the numbers swimming before my eyes. Thomas had always taught me that honesty keeps a business alive longer than money ever will. I felt his absence more keenly than ever. Over the next few weeks, the situation grew worse. More money began to move, quietly, without my approval. When I asked for explanations, I received vague reassurances. It is part of a new strategy. Clara has contacts who can help us expand. Do not worry about it, Mom. But I did worry. I could feel something unraveling. Not just the business, but my family. Then one evening, everything changed. It was late summer. The air was thick with the scent of rain, and the sky was heavy with clouds. I was sitting by the window when I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart leapt. I had not seen Michael in nearly 3 months. I hurried to the door, expecting to see my son smile, to hear his familiar voice. Instead, when I opened the door, I found Clara standing there, alone. She wore a tight expression, her jaw set, her posture rigid. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said curtly, "we need to talk." I stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. "Of course. Is everything all right?" She walked past me, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. She did not sit. She looked around the living room. The photographs, the old furniture, the framed picture of Thomas and me on our wedding day. Her eyes lingered on that picture for a moment before she turned back to me. "This house," she said slowly, "is under your name, correct?" I blinked. "Yes, it is. Thomas and I bought it together." "Why do you ask?" She crossed her arms. "Michael and I have been discussing your situation. You are getting older, and it might be time to start thinking about transferring ownership. For your safety, of course. It would make things easier in the future." Her words hit me like a slap. "Transfer ownership?" I repeated. "To whom?" "To Michael," she said plainly. "Or to both of us. It is the sensible thing to do. We can take care of the property, the business, everything. You should not have to worry about such burdens anymore." I stared at her, struggling to process what I was hearing. "I am perfectly capable of managing my home," I said firmly, "and my business as well." She smiled then, but it was not a kind smile. It was the kind of smile people wear when they believe they already have the upper hand. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said softly, "you do not need to pretend. Everyone ages. Mistakes happen. It would be safer if everything were handled by someone younger, someone responsible." I felt my knees tremble. "Are you implying that I am not responsible?" "I am implying that it would be best for everyone if you started letting go," she replied coolly. "Michael agrees." For a long moment, I could not speak. I looked at her. This woman I had welcomed into my home, loved like a daughter, and I saw nothing but calculation in her eyes. Finally, I whispered, "Please leave." She tilted her head. "Excuse me?" "I said leave," I repeated, my voice stronger this time. "You are standing in my husband's house, speaking to me like a stranger, and I will not tolerate it. Not one word more." She stared at me for a moment, then gave a small, cold laugh. "You will regret this," she said quietly, turning toward the door. "You are making things harder than they need to be." And then she was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I sank into the nearest chair, my hands shaking, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the door she had just closed behind her. I did not cry. Not yet. The tears would come later. For now, all I could feel was disbelief. That night, the phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he began, his voice tense. "What happened with Clara? She is very upset." "I should be the one asking that," I said quietly. "She came here demanding I hand over the house. Is that what you want, Michael?" He hesitated. "She just wants what is best for you. We both do." "Best for me?" I repeated. "Or best for you?" There was a long silence, then he said, "You are overreacting. Clara is only trying to help. But if you cannot see that, maybe it is better if we keep some distance for a while." And before I could reply, the line went dead. For the first time in my life, I felt something inside me break. A small, quiet fracture that spread through my heart like frost. In the days that followed, I hardly left the house. I stopped going to the shop. I could not bear to face the employees who had once admired Thomas's legacy, now uncertain about who truly owned what. Rumors began to circle, whispers that I was losing my memory, that I was making poor decisions, that perhaps I was not fit to manage the company anymore. I knew where those whispers came from. Clara. I could almost hear her voice, calm, reasonable, persuasive, telling people that she only wanted to help the poor widow, that I was tired and confused. She was poisoning everything I had built, one word at a time. And still, I hoped Michael would come to his senses, that he would see what was happening, that he would defend me. But instead, the silence between us grew wider. Then, one morning, I received a letter. It was official-looking, sealed with a lawyer's stamp. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a notice, a petition filed by my own son. It claimed that I was mentally unfit to manage the company, that I needed supervision, and that all assets, including the business and my home, should be transferred to him and his wife for safe management. I sat there at the kitchen table, the paper shaking in my hands, unable to breathe. The morning light spilled across the floor, touching the corner of Thomas's old chair, and I thought, if only he were here. The woman I had once called a daughter had turned my son against me, and the boy I had once held in my arms had become a stranger. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting of betrayal pierce deeper than any wound I had ever known. I had given them everything, my love, my trust, my home. And now, they wanted what was left of my dignity. The morning of the hearing arrived heavy and cold. The sky outside my window was gray, painted with streaks of pale silver where the sun struggled to break through the clouds. I had barely slept. For days, I had felt the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. The letter from the court had been sitting on the kitchen table for a week. Every time I looked at it, the words seemed to blur and reshape themselves into something crueler. Unfit. Incompetent. Mentally unsound. My own son's name at the bottom of those papers felt like a wound that would never heal. For a long time, I had thought about giving up, letting them take the house, the business, the legacy Thomas and I built together. But every time I stood by the old oak tree in the garden where Thomas and I used to sit after long workdays, I could hear his voice whisper in my heart, "Do not let them take what you bled for." That morning, I brewed a cup of tea and sat in silence, the steam curling toward the ceiling. I looked around my home, the faded photographs on the walls, the old clock that had stopped ticking 2 years ago but still hung above the fireplace. Everything in that house carried pieces of my life, of my love. I realized that if I walked away, I would not just be losing a roof, I would be losing my story. So I decided to fight. When I arrived at the courthouse, the air smelled faintly of rain. The marble steps were slick beneath my shoes. I clutched my purse tightly and lifted my chin, forcing myself to stand tall, even though every part of me wanted to collapse. Inside the courtroom, the world felt colder still. The walls were white and bare, the lights too bright. Michael sat at the table opposite mine, his face pale, his jaw tense. He would not meet my eyes. Beside him sat Clara, her hands folded neatly, her lips pressed in a thin, satisfied line. My lawyer, a kind older man named Mr. Lowell, leaned toward me and whispered, "You will speak only when addressed. Take your time. Tell the truth, Mrs. Hartwell. The truth always stands, even when people do not." I nodded, though my throat felt dry. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear nothing else for a moment. The hearing began. Papers shuffled, voices echoed, questions were asked. Michael's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "my clients are here only out of deep concern for Mrs. Hartwell's well-being. Over the past several months, she has displayed significant confusion in financial matters, erratic emotional behavior, and poor judgment in managing the family business." I listened as he spoke, each word cutting through me like a blade. He continued, "We have evidence that she has misplaced funds, ignored legal notices, and refused reasonable offers of assistance. My clients, Michael and Clara Hartwell, only wish to ensure her safety and protect her from potential exploitation." Clara's expression remained serene, almost saintly. Michael's eyes were fixed on the table. He could not even look at me. Mr. Lowell stood when it was our turn. His voice was calm but firm. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell is not confused. She is grieving. Her husband passed away 2 years ago, and her son has taken advantage of her vulnerability. We have records showing unauthorized transfers of funds from her company's accounts, all under Michael Hartwell's signature. We have testimonies from employees who witnessed his wife, Clara, giving orders as though she owned the place. The judge nodded slowly. Mrs. Hartwell, do you wish to speak for yourself? The moment had come. I rose slowly, my knees trembling slightly, and took a deep breath. My hands felt cold, but I clasped them together and stepped forward. Your Honor, I began, my voice shaking at first. I may be old, but I am not helpless. I may forget where I put my glasses, but I have not forgotten the years I spent building that company with my husband. I have not forgotten how to read a bank statement or how to recognize deceit. I turned my gaze toward Michael then. For the first time in months, he met my eyes. What I saw in them made my heart ache. Guilt, confusion, but also fear. When my husband and I started that business, I continued, we worked with our hands. We spent nights in the workshop, covered in sawdust with no money left for proper meals. But we built something honest, something lasting. When my husband died, I promised him I would protect it and protect our son. I never thought I would have to protect it from our son. The courtroom was silent. The sound of my voice filled the space, trembling but strong. I have made mistakes, I said softly. I have trusted too easily. I believed love would be enough to hold a family together. But I was wrong. Love without honesty becomes manipulation. Trust without respect becomes control. I paused, looking directly at Clara. Her expression faltered for the first time, a slight twitch in her jaw, a flicker in her eyes. Mrs. Hartwell, the judge said, do you have any evidence that these financial transfers were made without your knowledge? Mr. Lowell handed over a folder. We do, Your Honor. The bank confirmed that Mrs. Hartwell's digital signature was forged. The IP address used for the transactions belongs to the residence of Michael and Clara Hartwell. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Clara stiffened. Michael's eyes widened slightly. The judge examined the documents in silence. Forged signatures, he muttered. That is a serious accusation. Mr. Lowell nodded. Indeed, Your Honor. Furthermore, we have recordings from the company's accountant, who was instructed by Mrs. Clara Hartwell to redirect funds under the guise of business expansion. The air in the room shifted. Clara's calm facade began to crumble. She whispered something sharply to Michael, who looked even more pale than before. The judge leaned back in his chair. Mr. Hartwell, he said sternly, is this true? Michael hesitated, his throat moving as he swallowed hard. I did not know, he stammered. Clara said it was approved. She told me Mother agreed. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. My heart ached at the sound of his voice. That lost boy who once ran through the workshop with toy hammers, pretending to build like his father. When I opened my eyes again, I said quietly, Michael, I raised you to be honest, to stand by what is right, even when it is difficult. I can forgive you for being misled, but I cannot forgive silence. The judge tapped his pen against the table. Mrs. Hartwell, he said, it appears you have been wronged. We will review these documents and testimonies thoroughly. Until then, no assets will be transferred, and the ownership of the house and business will remain under your name. For a moment, I could not breathe. The tension that had coiled around my chest loosened slightly. But then the judge added, this court will reconvene in 2 weeks for a final decision. I advise both parties to resolve their disputes peacefully in the meantime. The gavel struck the wood and the session was adjourned. Outside the courthouse, the air felt fresher, almost alive. Rain had begun to fall, gentle at first, then steadier, washing over the steps and the pavement. I stood beneath the awning, watching it pour, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. I heard footsteps behind me. Michael's voice came softly. Mom. I turned. He stood there, soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I am sorry. The words sounded small, fragile, but they were real. I wanted to make things easier, he said, his voice breaking. Clara said it was the right thing. She said you were struggling, that you needed help. I raised my hand gently. No more excuses, Michael. You thought wrong. Help does not take away. It gives. And love does not lie. He looked down, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I do not know what to do now. You start by taking responsibility, I said softly. You tell the truth. To me, to the court, to yourself. He nodded slowly. I will. Clara appeared behind him then, standing a few steps away, her expression unreadable. She did not speak. Her eyes darted between us, but when she saw Michael's face, she understood. Something in him had changed. Her control was slipping. Without a word, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the wet pavement until the sound disappeared into the distance. I stood there, watching her vanish, and for the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not joy, not yet, but peace. I placed a hand over my heart and whispered, Thomas, I kept my promise. The rain fell harder then, but I did not move. I let it wash over me, cleansing everything that had been broken and stained. For so long, I had believed I was fighting to protect a house, a company, a name. But standing there in the rain, I realized something deeper. I had been fighting to protect the truth of who I was. A woman who loved fiercely, who endured, who refused to let betrayal define the end of her story. And in that moment, I knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something new. A life rebuilt on strength, not sorrow. 2 weeks later, the court announced its final decision. The judge ruled that the accusations against me were unfounded. The forged signatures were undeniable proof of deceit, and the documents restored every legal right I had worked for all my life. The company, the house, and my dignity were all returned to me. When the verdict was read aloud, I did not feel triumph. I felt relief, and a strange kind of sorrow. I had not wanted victory. I had only wanted truth. Yet truth has a way of demanding a price. Mine came in the form of a broken family. Michael sat a few rows behind me, his face pale, his eyes downcast. Clara was nowhere to be seen. She had chosen not to appear that day. Perhaps she knew what the outcome would be. Perhaps guilt had already taken root in her heart. After the proceedings ended, I walked out of the courthouse and stood for a long moment on the steps, feeling the cool air brush against my face. I thought of Thomas then, his laughter, his strength, his quiet wisdom. I imagined him standing beside me, proud yet saddened that things had come to this. I whispered softly into the breeze, "It is done, my love. I have kept what we built. But I have lost what I never thought I would. Our child's trust." That night, I returned home to silence. The house felt vast, like a cathedral of memories. Every creak in the wooden floor reminded me of footsteps long gone. I made myself a simple dinner, soup and bread, and sat at the same table where my family had once shared laughter, arguments, and love. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. I had not noticed before how comforting that sound could be. For the first time in many months, I slept without waking in the middle of the night. I dreamed of the ocean, of wide open skies, of light breaking through gray clouds. When I awoke, I realized what I needed to do. I needed to live again. The next morning, I packed a small suitcase, just a few clothes, a book, and my husband's old photograph. I locked the front door gently behind me and left for the seaside town where Thomas and I had spent our honeymoon almost 40 years earlier. When I arrived, the world felt new. The air smelled of salt and pine. The sea stretched endlessly before me, its waves slow and patient. I walked along the shore until the sand covered my shoes. The sound of the water was like a heartbeat, steady and soothing. I found a small inn near the cliffs, an old ivy-covered place run by a kind widow named Mrs. Linton. She showed me to a cozy room with white curtains and a view of the sea. "You will sleep well here," she said kindly. "The ocean always heals those who listen." She was right. Every morning, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and watched the horizon. The waves moved with a rhythm that reminded me of breathing. of letting go and beginning again. I started writing in a small notebook I had brought. At first, I wrote about pain, about betrayal, about the ache of loss. But slowly, the words began to change. I wrote about forgiveness, strength, and the quiet beauty of solitude. It was as if every tide pulled a little more bitterness out of me, leaving something purer behind. After a few weeks, I began exploring the town. There was a small market near the harbor, filled with the scent of baked bread and fresh flowers. The people greeted me warmly, even though they did not know my story. I met a group of women who gathered every Sunday at a local cafe. They were widows, grandmothers, and retired teachers, women with their own stories of loss and rebirth. One of them, a cheerful woman named Mabel, invited me to join their gatherings. "You have kind eyes," she said. "That usually means you have a heavy heart. Come have tea with us. It helps." I smiled. "Perhaps it does," I replied. Those Sunday mornings soon became the highlight of my week. We talked about everything: old loves, grown children, favorite recipes, books, and dreams we still wish to chase. I found comfort in their laughter, in their resilience. Each woman had survived something, yet none had let bitterness define her. One morning, as we sat watching the boats glide in the harbor, Mabel turned to me and said, "You know, Evelyn, forgiveness is not about forgetting. It is about refusing to let pain become your identity." Her words settled deep inside me. That evening, I walked by the sea and thought about what forgiveness truly meant. I realized that holding on to anger was like clutching a shard of glass. It only cut deeper the longer I held it. So, standing beneath the soft pink light of sunset, I whispered into the wind, "I forgive you, Michael. I forgive you, Clara. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The waves rolled in, gentle and slow, as if carrying my words away. For the first time, my chest felt light. Months passed. The salt air had made my hair curl, and the lines on my face seemed softer somehow. I felt alive in a way I had not in years. I read more, cooked simple meals, and spent hours tending to Mrs. Linton's garden. One afternoon, while trimming roses, I heard a voice behind me. "Mother?" I turned slowly. There stood Michael, his face thinner, his eyes heavy with remorse. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. He took a hesitant step forward. "I did not know where else to go," he said quietly. "Clara left. She took the little we had saved. I lost the apartment. I lost everything." I put down the shears and wiped my hands on my apron. My heart ached as I looked at him, not with anger, but with an old tenderness I thought had vanished. "Michael," I said softly, "you have not lost everything. You have lost what needed to be lost." He blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Sometimes," I said, "life strips away what is false so that we can finally rebuild on truth. Perhaps this is your chance to begin again." He lowered his head, tears glistening in his eyes. "I do not deserve forgiveness." "Perhaps not," I replied gently. "But forgiveness is not something earned. It is something given." I gestured toward the bench overlooking the garden. We sat together, silent for a long while. The sound of the sea filled the air between us. "I am sorry, Mother," he whispered at last. "I truly am." "I know," I said quietly. "And I believe you." He nodded slowly, his shoulders trembling. "I will make things right. I will find work. I will pay back what I took." I smiled faintly. "Do not worry about the money. Just promise me one thing, that you will live honestly from now on, that you will never let greed steal your soul again." He reached for my hand. His grip was warm, trembling, familiar. "I promise." In that moment, I felt something mend inside me, a tear that had ached for far too long. The forgiveness I had spoken to the wind now had a face, a heartbeat, and a son's broken voice attached to it. When Michael left the next day, he hugged me tightly. "I will visit again soon," he said. "I want to show you that I can be better." I watched him walk down the path, sunlight falling across his shoulders. I knew he would face hardships, but I also knew he had finally found the courage to start over, and that was enough. I stayed in that seaside town for the rest of the year. It became my sanctuary, a place where the past no longer haunted me, but guided me gently forward. I began volunteering at a small community center, teaching older women how to manage their finances. Many of them had stories like mine, stories of trust misplaced, of love turned to betrayal. I taught them how to read contracts, how to protect their names, and how to believe in themselves again. One day, a woman clasped my hand and said, "You have given me back my strength." I smiled and answered, "You never lost it. You only forgot where to look." As the seasons changed, so did I. My pain became my teacher. My solitude became my peace. On quiet evenings, I would still talk to Thomas. I would tell him about the women I had met, about Michael's letters that arrived once every few weeks, about the simple joy of watching the sunset over the ocean. I felt him with me, not as a ghost, but as a gentle reminder that love never truly dies. It only changes form. And so, my story did not end in bitterness. It ended in strength, in grace, in the rediscovery of myself. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not in winning a battle, but in choosing peace after the war has ended. When I look back on everything that has happened, I do not feel hatred anymore. I feel gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for the lessons that grew out of it. Life has a way of breaking us so that we may finally see who we truly are beneath the surface of love, duty, and sacrifice. I once believed that being a good mother meant giving endlessly. I thought that love meant surrendering everything, my time, my savings, even my peace. But I have learned that love without respect is not love at all. It is dependence dressed in affection. Forgiveness, I now understand, is not about forgetting what others have done. It is about freeing yourself from the chains of their choices. When you let go of bitterness, you make room for grace. When you stop begging for love, you begin to discover your own worth. If there is one thing my story has taught me, it is this: a mother's heart must have boundaries, just as the sea has shores. Without them, even love can drown. So live gently, but live wisely. Love deeply, but love yourself enough to walk away from those who wound you. If my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Grandma Fables. Every story here carries a piece of truth, a reminder that even through betrayal and heartbreak, there is always hope, healing, and the quiet strength to begin again.